Hey guys, it's Danzo here, and welcome to a different kind of video today. This is a brand new channel I made called Lunar Magic Tutorials, and this is something I kind of wanted to try to help everybody figure out how to kind of make their own Super Mario World levels without possibly having Mario Maker or some expensive program or having any real technical know-how. This is a method that has been around for a long time now, and many people have adored it, and there are all kinds of tutorials all over YouTube. But I figured I'd give myself a go because a long time ago I used to make my own tutorials and my own ROM hacks, and I used to play ROM hacks. And that's what these are, and they're very fun to do. And so if there are any of you who might be curious about that or might want to do that to create your own levels or something, I'm going to make my own personal guides for you. And hopefully myself later on as well if I decide to get back into it. So right off the bat, in order to get into it, we're going to open a program called Lunar Magic. Now, Lunar Magic is a free to download program. You can go anywhere online to download it. You can go anywhere on the internet. It's a program created by this guy named Fusoya on Super Mario World Central, and basically he created this program just to edit the worlds inside Super Mario World. And along with that came the idea to create all kinds of different programs to do different things for the Mario World ROMs. So while Fusoya's intention was really just a level editor, people have created all kinds of programs to let you add in your own blocks, your own custom story cutscenes, things that Super Mario World was never able to do from the beginning. Basically, when you go to the Super Mario World website, supermarioworldcentral.net, you click on the tools bar and you'll find this program, where you can find this program anywhere else on the internet if you just type in Lunar Magic on Google. Next, after you get Lunar Magic, what you'll need is a Super Mario World ROM. And you can download this from any ROM site. Not going to tell you where or anything. It's really easy to do, so just go to Google for that. All I did for this was I just hit open with, and I chose Lunar Magic out of my programs, and now I can open all of these type of files with Lunar Magic easily, so I don't have to open Lunar Magic first, then go to the file and search for it, yada yada. Now I suppose first I should talk about what all of these cool looking buttons up here do. Basically there are two components to creating a Super Mario World ROM hack at the super basic level. You have an object editor, which is what this is. If you hover over it, it'll talk about layers or whatever the button is. This is layer 1, otherwise known as object editing. Notice how when I highlight all of the things like the ground, the bushes, the pipe, this Yoshi coin, but I don't highlight the enemies. The enemies aren't highlighted, they aren't purple. That's because there are two different types of, I'd say, interactable objects in a ROM hack, and that is one, just basic objects, and these have no limit to which you can throw into a ROM hack. You can throw in as many hills, as many bushes, as many coins, as many ground pieces, as many slopes as you want. But there are other pieces known as sprites, and sprites are what you see here, are the enemies. Now, since I clicked on this tab called Layer 2, I can now select these enemies. And basically, the way a Mario World ROM works is that there are sprite limitations, meaning if you have too many sprites in one spot on the screen, the game will slow down, lag, or sometimes even crash, depending on how bad it is. And keep in mind that some objects will spawn sprites for you. For example, if I go into this object selector window, I may put a question mark block down that spawns a fire flower. If I put down a whole line of those all across the map and then I start hitting them from the bottom, it's going to spawn a lot of fire flowers and mushrooms, and the game's not going to be able to handle that because that's spawning more sprites, and the sprites will overload the game. People have developed some kind of fix for this. I've never really dabbled too much into it because usually you can get around with the normal sprite limitation. Lunar Magic will also give you a warning telling you there are too many sprites on the screen sometimes if you add so many in. But we'll get into that later. So for now, we'll just talk about these layers here. The object layer, as you saw, ground and everything else. The sprite layer, power-ups, checkpoints, enemies, etc. And this layer right here called Layer 2. Notice how when I click it, I can't really select it. And that's because Layer 2 is a special layer that Nintendo uses for, or rather the ROM uses, to separate things like moving ground objects, like the castles or the moving up and down pillars inside the caves, those are layer 2. And so the game recognizes them as a whole different system, and to do that you have to change the level's code. And like I said, that's for a later video. Next, if we come over here, this is to the Add Objects window. Now, objects, as I said, are nearly unlimited. You have a whole different amount of objects you can add here. You can add standard objects, which is the basic list. Everything comes in basically a 2x2 block, so these coins here. And as I'm sure you assumed, left clicking is just to select, right click is to paste. And keep in mind, whenever you select something, it doesn't matter if I have it selected on this window right here. If I select this mountain, I have these selected, and I just look at these, and I think I'm going to paste the coins, and I paste that, don't worry, you didn't break anything. That's just because you didn't deselect the mountain when you were going to paste the coins instead. See, now I have the coins, so there you go. As I was saying, these standard objects are grouped in 4s usually. Like here, black piranha plants, they don't look very good. They're sort of stacked on each other. A lot of people like to do this kind of thing for very hard hacks, but it looks horrible. Whoops, we don't want to save that. Yeah, and like cement blocks, a lot of times you want to use a single block, so you're going to be very limited with these options, but they're very good at keeping you rigid with your design, in that there's not a whole lot of room to mess up with those. It'll look blatantly obvious if something doesn't look right. Next we come into the tileset specific objects. Now, tileset specific objects pertains to specific situations in the game, and specific objects that pertain to specific parameters within the game's code. So, for example, red switch blocks, and for any item inside of the game or inside of Lunar Magic, you can hover over them, and it will tell you what these blocks do. Let's see if I can hover over these. There we go. Red switch block. It will appear as an outline if the switch of this color hasn't been activated yet. So these are specific to the red switch palace, meaning these blocks will not or should not appear until I hit the red switch palace. These objects are very conditional. Icy blue usually doesn't work properly unless ice is implemented into the level. So basically that's all that means, is it just needs specific parameters for it to work properly. Extended objects is where things get a little bit more specific and a little bit easier to work with. So extended objects are just pieces of objects of the 2x2s that we saw earlier, except this time they're all 1x1. So if I want to spawn a coin block with a star in it, but I only want to spawn one, I can go to the extended objects, right click it, and paste it into the level just like that. So yeah, very simple, very easy to understand. Again, hovering over everything will tell you what it does. And finally, we get to the direct map 16 access. Now what this is the map 16 images that the game uses to load all of the game's graphics. And basically these are pieces of the 4x4, pieces of a 2x2, or any kind of object you find. Pieces of the ground here are all over the place in here. You can use these, however, most of the time, like say these switch blocks, remember how we talked about the red switch blocks earlier? These red ones will always appear solid, no matter what. It says since this was inserted as a tile rather than an object, it will always appear this way whether the switch palace has been pressed or not. Because it's not in the extended or specific tile set objects. This is just sort of the game's test map for objects, I guess you could say. And so sometimes you want to be very careful, like the ice pipes won't work properly unless you make the entire level icy, etc., etc. You should get the drift. Now, if we move on to the sprites, we have the same kind of deal with the sprites. Again, remember that if you want to edit with sprites instead, you have to switch your tool over into this green shell up here. If you don't do that, you'll be continually pasting and selecting objects, and you'll get really confused and frustrated and go, why am I not pasting regular enemies? Because you're still in the object editing menu. once you come here, you're allowed to edit your sprites. Now, keep in mind what I said earlier. If you add too many sprites in one place, the game will cause severe lag and slowdown. So if I just added Koopas raining down from hell into Mario's face, that is going to slow down the game. A lot of these won't appear, and it's not good. So be very careful when adding sprites. Most of the time, they're very self-explanatory. If you have any questions as to what specific ones do, the game will absolutely tell you if you just hover over them for a moment. These are really easy to understand and figure out. We'll get into things like this. We'll get into that a little bit later. So that's the standard sprites tab. Tile set specific sprites. So just like the specific objects, these tiles are specific to the environment and the position in which they're placed. For example, this Yoshi egg, it's blue in a certain position, yellow in a different one, red in a different one, etc. These brown platforms don't fall unless buoyancy is enabled on water in a level. I'll show you how to do that later. Charge and chuck, split and chuck, bounce and chuck, clap and chuck. All of these look proper right now. But if you notice, if we go to special commands and generators, that's kind of what you were noticing earlier. A lot of these are also self-explanatory, but most of the time, if you're just doing basic editing, you're not really going to need to go into these. Bullet bill shooter, bullet bill generator, what these are just things that automatically appear. For example, a bullet bill generator, if you place it in a level, will generate random bullet bills throughout a certain height from Mario. And I can't remember what the specific height is. However, I do know that it randomly just shoots the bullet bills. Whereas a bullet bill shooter is a sprite that you place inside of a bullet bill cannon, and it will continually fire bullet bills, obviously. So yeah, we'll get into all those later. Custom collections of sprites. These are for custom sprites. We don't have to worry about those yet because they're a little bit finicky to add in. And as for right now, you'll notice sometimes that when you add certain sprites, they may not look correctly. For example, bonsai bills look correctly in this level, but in another level, they may look all garbled and absolutely not correct at all. And that's because the game relies on, again, it's very conditional. Certain levels have certain graphics that are applied to, and you can change those, which, again, we'll get into later. So we've gone through the 5 buttons right here. Up here is the 8x8 graphics editor window. I'll tell you why in a little while why I wouldn't use this window so much to do a lot of this work. This is for editing color palettes and whatnot of blocks or editing anything else of blocks. You could literally recolor certain blocks right here. You could recolor them to be all black. You could recolor them to be all red. Don't do it because it might look bad. But that's all this is. This is basically just palette editing and just the way you want your blocks to look. 16x16 tile map editor. We saw this earlier in the objects window. This is different. This object window is different from the map editor. The map editor will allow you to take literal objects like a coin, or say, what should I look for? Or say water. This water graphic here, I could put it right on top of that. That was just a simple left click and a right click. When I put it on there, that actually changes the block to become water. But if you notice, all the other ones are just a specific tile, meaning they're like the cement blocks. You can't go under them or through them or anything. They're just solid. This window is very useful for doing specific things like making fake blocks or making blocks that you can stand on top of and go through the bottom of. Kind of making your own custom blocks and not really. It's kind of like a trick almost. So yeah. Those are easier to understand. Background layer 2 editor window. This is just for editing the background. If I wanted to put more clouds, I could select a cloud and put one there and one there and one there, and then it would loop throughout the entire level. But that looks pretty bad, so we're just gonna undo what we just did because that was a lot of clouds. Up here is the overworld editor. There will be a whole different video on this, so don't even worry about it right now. Just know that you can select and hit delete and completely clear this, and it will look like Mario is just standing on water. And yeah, so you don't have to mess with it right now. This right here is the palette editor. I mentioned earlier that the 8x8 was also for palettes. It is if you want to do palette editing specifically block by block. Whoops, there goes my phone. Or pixel by pixel, I'm sorry. However, the palette editor will allow you to change things like Mario's palette to a specific color much more easily. For example, if I wanted Mario's hat to be blue instead of red, I would just find his color up here, change it to blue, and it would change all of his hat to blue, rather than me having to go back and hit right-click every single pixel in order to change it blue. So that's all that does, and that was that star. The zoom, pretty self-explanatory. We can zoom in 800%. This is for figuring out how fine and how precise you can get your placements for objects and sprites. Just use that to your best ability, I guess. View animation. This just changes the animation of certain objects and sprites. For example, this Yoshi coin is glowing. If I click that, it'll stop glowing. If I click it again, it'll continue glowing. Be careful if you ever add a custom object or sprite and you have animations off, and then you notice that it's not moving or whatever like it's supposed to, and you'll start to freak out, and you'll realize that you don't have the animation button on. So try to always keep that on. Quick extract GFX from ROM. Now this little mushroom here is used for all kinds of editing through an external program, and we'll get into that later, but basically you click on that to extract a ROM's graphics, basic graphics that come with the ROM, and it creates its own folder for that specific ROM with your ROM's title. And then you have a quick insert for the graphics, so if you extract them, you edit a graphic, and then you want to put it back into the ROM, you hit this green mushroom and it'll be done. Quick extract XGFX. XGFX just stands for extra graphics. We don't have any, so don't worry about it. Quick insert XGFX, self-explanatory. Super GFX bypass. Right, so in most cases, you'll get, if you start with a brand new ROM, most of the time the ROM is really, really small. And this causes a problem when you're trying to do things like add super graphics or different kind of graphics, or add extra enemies or anything like that. It's going to have to be expanded. The newer versions of Lunar Magic added its own expander. You used to have to download a program called Lunar Expand, but now Lunar Magic has it already incorporated, so there's no need to do that. This just asks if you want to expand it to 1 megabyte. You say yes, and now we can use the Super GFX bypass. And if you hit this, enable bypass of standard FG, BG, SP graphics. That means foreground, background, and special graphics. I believe that's special. Or sprite, sorry, sprite graphics. The foreground graphics, if you change these are going to change the way that the floor looks. Oh dear, I am afraid I may have just done that. I'm just going to cancel. But basically that's how you edit the graphics of the game. That will change the way all of this looks. Only really mess with it if you know what you're doing. Change GFX in header, as you can tell. So basically, if I was going to put items down for the Switch Palace, like the yellow switch, I would hit Switch Palace here. That's, again, for later. And layer 3 GFX, same kind of deal, but a little bit more specific. Open modify screen exits. Now, these are interesting because screen exits are exits in the level like pipes. For example, when Mario goes down this pipe, there's a specific screen exit right here that will transport him to a whole different level, and then when he exits through another screen exit pipe in that level, it will shoot him out here, secondary exit entrance. Again, we don't have to worry about those right now for today, as we are just touching the basics. This is going to be a longer video because it's just going through all the buttons, and they do so many different things. That's to edit the main position of Mario himself, where he starts in the map. Again, a lot of stuff that you really don't have to worry about if you're just doing basic level editing. This is just to view what parts of the screen have exits. If you put in a pipe where no exit is, and you go down that pipe, an exitable pipe, it will crash the game because it doesn't know what to do when you go through that pipe. So that's really important when adding exits. You want to have that on at all times. Change the properties in header. So these, if you notice, these are the properties of the specific level. So here it says no vertical scroll unless flying, climbing, etc. Meaning this level will not scroll up, the camera will not pan up unless Mario is climbing or flying or anything of that nature. It will not climb up if you simply jump, or if you're, basically if you just jump. We could simply change that by just hit vertical scrolling at will, meaning anytime Mario goes higher than the center of the screen, it will scroll with him, and a lot of people use that to their advantage. Change properties in the sprite header. These are sprite buoyancy properties. These are different properties for the specific sprites. For example, if buoyancy is not really enabled and you put a platform that's supposed to float on water and you don't have this enabled, the platform will not float. It may even disappear. So you kind of need that in any kind of buoyancy deal. These are the vertical scrolling and horizontal scrolling rates, meaning do you want it to change variably? Again, we don't really have to go into it because we're not going to be touching that. Change layer 3. Layer 3, again, there's not a whole lot to do with layer 3. Layer 3 is ocean, water levels, basically. So we all know how much we all love those. Time and music editor. So basically you can hit bypass the time limit and change how long a player has to beat your level to whenever you want. Again, not hard to figure out. You can change what music is used here. For example, if I hit Switch Palace here, every time I go into this level 1, it'll play the Switch Palace music. These empty slots are all for custom music, which we may or may not do. I don't think we will unless we're asked to do it. So these are edit level extended animation frames to add your own animated objects and sprites into the game. X animated frames, these are for your extra graphics. I'm sorry, these are for your own these are for your own animated objects, and then this one is for already existing animated objects. This coin is also edit animation, and you just kind of want to check all those. It's not hard to really mess with it. You don't have to mess with it. It does nothing. And so that kind of concludes what the introduction to Lunar Magic is like. There's not a whole lot to it. It's a very basic editor, yet you can do a lot of things with it and do a lot of interesting hacks and different ideas, and is really fun to use. So if anyone would like to see more of these videos, or if you found this kind of helpful or quick, it probably wasn't very quick, it's probably a long video, but if you would like to see more of these, I'd like to create a lot shorter ones in the future of just really basic things on how to do certain things. It's a really fun thing to do, and it's totally free. You don't need a Wii U, you don't need an expensive software program, you don't need to take a programming class. It's really easy to play. So if anyone would like more videos on this, please let me know down below, and I'll see everybody next time. Thank you so much for watching.